Hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. Today I will be narrating for you the second to last chapter of Blemished Beauty, and I know you want to hear it, so here we go. Chapter 25, Exposed. Tom slammed his fist down hard on the desk, causing the receptionist in front of him to jump in her seat, and the pens tumbled out of their cup next to her.
"Do you have any idea what kind of man Bridges is?" Tom whispered fiercely, leaning close to the woman.
The woman jolted her head back, shocked by Tom's reaction.
Never mind," Tom said curtly as he crinkled up the paper on the desk that stated the officials in the court.
Utterly livid, Tom stomped his way out of the courthouse and down some long, steep stairs leading to the street below. How did this happen? After all the phone calls he had made and all the promises people had made to him, how could Judge Bridges still be the judge? Tom snatched his phone from his pocket and angrily punched in a phone number. He had to dial it 3 times since his fuming fingers kept missing the correct digits. "Hello, Tom," came the voice on the other end. "I know you're angry with me."
"You bet I am, Craig," Tom shot back. "You told me you were certain you could find evidence that Bridges had been bought out."
"I know, and I did find it, but..."
"But what?"
Tom yelled into the phone. "It's gone, Tom. I don't know how, but all my documents are gone."
"What do you mean they're gone?" Tom shouted.
"I mean they're missing," said the frantic man. "My hard drive is wiped out, and my paper copies have vanished. I had them locked up, but they still disappeared." Tom bit his lip as he ducked his head. Dread and despair flooded his chest.
"It cannot end this way. I can't afford to hire another detective," Tom mumbled, mostly to himself. "I need money for a lawyer."
A moment of silence passed. "I would lend the money to you if I could, Tom."
"I'm sure you would,"
Tom whispered again. "Thanks anyway. Good luck to you. I'm so sorry about all of this." "Yeah," Tom said as he ended the call. Tom was rubbing his head hard as he began pacing back and forth. An abrupt ring made him almost jump out of his skin. He sighed when he realized it was his own phone. "Hello, Jenny? Tom, where are you? I have something for you." "What do you mean? Are you here in Brocksville?" "Yes, I'm driving around Central Park. Where are you?" "I'm at the courthouse," Tom replied. "Why are you here?" "Stay where you are. I'll see you in 5. Click. Tom peered at his phone in confusion. What was his sister doing here? He didn't need this distraction right now. He began to pace all the more impatiently while waiting for his sister to arrive. Finally, he recognized the sound of his pa's 20-year-old Jeep hum in front of him on the street. Jenny had barely stopped before she hopped out and scurried over to him. "Tom!" she cried, throwing her arms around him. "Hey, sis," he said, returning the hug. "This is a surprise. This is for you. It came in the mail today. It says urgent, so Ma told me to drive over here and give it to you right away." Tom examined the envelope carefully. "Afghanistan. Could this be?" he said out loud. He tore the envelope open. The first thing he noticed was a big fat check written to him in a scrawling hand. "No way!" he exclaimed. "What is it?" asked Jenny. Tom glanced up at his sister. I wrote to Daphne's father in Afghanistan because she's in trouble. He sent me some money to help. I can't believe it got here so fast. Look at how much he spent on postage to make it priority mail." He pointed to the stamps on the envelope. Jenny glanced at it quickly, but didn't appear very interested in that particular detail. "What kind of trouble is Daphne in?" Tom shook his head and opened up the letter to read it. "Dear Mr. Moulton, I am appalled at the news you have shared with me. My wife and I will get on the very next available flight to Brocksville, but we are having visa problems. I know you didn't ask for any money, but please use this for legal fees. We hope to see you and our dear Daphne very soon. Regards, Zach Zollinger. P.S. I know a superb detective in Brocksville, Philip Ross. He's the quirkiest, most honest man alive. Look him up. He might be able to help." Tom smiled as hope flooded through him. "Tom," Jenny said a bit impatiently, "are you going to answer my question? What kind of trouble is Daphne in?" Tom looked up at his sister again. Let's go for a drive, and I'll tell you about it. Tom sat and waited for Detective Ross in his huge fifth-story office that overlooked Brocksville. He could see nothing but blue sky through the glass windows that stood tall from ceiling to floor. A half-dozen foreign plants in big pots dotted the large space. His desk had nothing on it but a thick, leather-covered planner. Abruptly, Detective Ross bolted into the room. Tom turned in his seat to see him. He was skinny and wiry, with lots of moles on his bald head. His thick, circular spectacles made his eyes look like they were behind a magnifying glass. Without a word, he stared at Tom as he made his way around his desk. He plopped himself down in the black leather chair and noisily scooted it in. He interlocked his fingers and placed them in front of him. "What can I do for you?" he asked, raising his eyebrows above his glasses. Tom was surprised the detective didn't offer any introductions. "I'm Tom Moulton," he said, deciding to introduce himself anyway. "I would like you to look into a person of rather high clout here in the community." The detective's mouth turned slightly mischievous. "And who is that?" he wondered. "Judge Bridges, sir." Without any warning, Detective Ross burst into a strange high cackle. "Judge Bridges?" he hooted with his head thrown back. "We don't need proof to know he's a bad egg." "But we need proof this time," Tom blurted out. Ross glanced back at him as his laugh subdued. "Okay," he agreed, waving his fingers toward him as if he were beckoning to a child to come close. "Tell me everything." Hastily, Tom told the detective everything, from the party at Daphne's dorm to the bruised Daphne outside David's bedroom, to his chat with Laurel, as well as his work with Craig and the subsequent missing files. Tom was so furious inside after he had finished, he felt his heart just might explode right out of him. Ross leaned back in his seat and folded his arms. "It sounds like you and Craig already gathered enough hard evidence to convict the little Dilute snake. We need to retrieve it, and then find evidence Bridges was involved." By the twisting of his mouth and the spitting of his words, Tom was pleased to notice Ross already hated the Dilutes. Or maybe it was Bridges. Either way, Tom felt hope again. Ross thrummed his fingers up and down on the desk for a long moment, before he suddenly slapped his palm down hard. "All right, let's get going," he exclaimed, standing up. Tom stood with him. "Am I coming with you?" he asked. "Well, you'll certainly be useful since you witnessed so much, and can probably answer some questions that will come up along the way. Don't you want to catch the scoundrel?" he asked, raising his eyebrows high. "Well, yes, of course," Tom said. Ross meandered to the front of his office and opened the door, gesturing for Tom to proceed. "Well then," he said, "let's get going." Their first stop was the police station. Tom ended up having to fill out every form and write every statement he had already written again, so Ross could get a search warrant for David's belongings, specifically his vehicle. Warrant in hand, the two men walked back to the detective's modest Corolla. "You think we will find something in Dilute's car?" asked Tom. "He's a filthy rich brat, isn't he?" Ross noted. "Probably has a GPS, at least." "Probably, so?" "We'll find something, then," Ross said with a grin. Detective Ross drove like a maniac. Just as Tom's head had stopped spinning from the ride, Ross had already jumped in and out of David's flashy red Beamer. "I got it! Let's go," he declared as he let out his high cackle. "You got what? And where are we going?" Tom questioned. "To see Judge Bridges. Get in the car." "What?" Tom asked, confused. He had barely shut the passenger door before Ross was speeding off again. "The GPS showed that the snake went to Bridges' office. I probably won't be able to get a warrant to search any of Bridges' files, so I'm going to have a chat with him, see him squirm a bit." "Will that help?" Tom asked skeptically. "You know he won't tell the truth." "I do know that," Ross said. "I'm good at reading people, though. He might give me another clue of what to do next." Tom sighed heavily. He hoped Ross knew what he was doing. Tom felt adrenaline pump through his veins as he walked into Judge Bridges' office with Detective Ross. It was smaller than Ross's office, and quite bare by comparison. Not a single plant was in sight, only a shiny oak desk and a middle-aged man slouched over it. Judge Bridges had dark black eyes and deep wrinkles that smothered his entire countenance. He said nothing as the two men walked in. He just glared at the detective for one penetrating minute. "Shall we sit down?" asked Ross finally. However, the question sounded anything but polite. Bridges smirked. "Don't bother. I don't think this meeting will last long." Ross sniffed and sat down anyway. Tom followed suit. The two older men didn't even seem to notice he was there as they stared each other down. "I found on David DeLute's GPS that he's paid you several visits," said Ross. Although his tone was light, it sounded like a very pointed allegation. "Why do you care what Robert's son does?" Bridges asked him, a scowl crossing his face. "Ah, yes, Robert DeLute," Ross said snidely. "I'm sure you two weasels are the best of friends." Bridges rolled his eyes. "How much did they pay you this time?" "There you go again with your accusations," Bridges said with a wicked smile. "How dare you? I'm an honest judge." Tom scoffed out loud. For the first time, Bridges turned to face him. "Who is this lovely sunset boy?" he asked condescendingly. "The one who is going to see you put in jail," Tom threatened coolly. Bridges laughed out loud. "How cute." Tom glowered back at him but said nothing. "I have a warrant to search all of David's possessions," Ross announced. "So why don't you just let me see his files? Bridges put on a conniving smile. "As you very well know, detective, your warrant doesn't include things in my possession." He grinned wider to show his shiny white teeth. Ross shrugged. "Well then, maybe I'll just go talk to all the waitresses at your favorite restaurant and see if they overheard any meetings you had there with David DeLute. Surely they'll remember seeing such an infamous rich young man there." The judge's eyes bulged for a brief moment before he raised his eyebrows in feigned nonchalance. Detective Ross nodded. "Good chat, Judge. I hope you don't break too many laws today." He stood up and made his way to the door. Tom took a moment to glare at the judge one more time before he did the same. As the big double doors to Bridges' office latched shut behind them, Detective Ross leaned over to Tom. "Let's go to that restaurant," he whispered. Tom nodded, and the two sauntered down a long corridor. Tom noticed Bridges' secretary stared at him wide-eyed as he passed her. "Oh, excuse me," she called to him. Tom turned to see the short blonde scamper toward him in her high, thin heels, her gray business suit swishing along with her. "Excuse me," she said again when she reached him. Her bright red lips were trembling slightly. She smiled a nervous smile. "I'm Wanda. What's your name?" she stuttered. "This is Mr. Moulton," Ross said, as he put one casual hand on Tom's shoulder. "And he really needs to go now." Wanda seemed all the more frazzled by this. "Oh, I was just hoping that you would call me sometime." She smiled anxiously and held out a shaking piece of paper to him. Ross dropped his arm and laughed under his breath. Tom rubbed his chin and smiled politely. "I'm very flattered, Wanda, but I sort of have a girlfriend." Of course, "sort of" was the truest part of that statement. Wanda smiled rather forcefully this time and grabbed Tom's hand and placed the paper in it. "Well, take my number just in case." Tom furrowed his brow as he felt something hard inside the paper. He glanced down to see what it was, but Wanda quickly put her other hand on top. "Shh," she said with just her lips, shaking her head the tiniest bit. Confused, Tom studied her face, trying to discern what she was saying. "Let's go, Mr. Moulton," Detective Ross muttered, grabbing him by the shoulder and coaxing him to turn around. "Just walk out," he whispered to him. Ross must have noticed it too. Tom turned his head and waved at Wanda. Wanda waved back, looking nothing but relieved he was leaving. Tom tried to be discreet as he stuffed the hard thing into his pocket, burning with curiosity as to what it was. When they finally sat down in the detective's vehicle, Tom began to reach into his pocket. "Don't get it out now," Ross fiercely whispered as he surveyed the oncoming traffic. However, his expression was as casual as ever. "Why not?" Tom wondered.
Wait until Bridges can no longer see us from his office window.
All right. Tom forced himself to be patient as he buckled his seatbelt. Tom waited until they were 2 blocks away before he pulled out the strange object. Small and gray and rectangular, Tom instantly recognized it as a voice recorder. Detective Ross let his high cackle go free.
Ha! This is great! Let's listen to it.
Tom pressed the playback button. A man was shouting angrily. He didn't recognize the voice.
Ah, that Robert rascal,
Detective Ross spit. Robert DeLute? Tom asked. Ross nodded but held a hand up to silence him. His driving slowed as the two listened intensely. Robert was so angry his words were hard to understand. But Tom did hear him say,
"You owe me one. You owe me this. And my son will not, and just a silly girl, and my career will not be interfered by this."
Judge Bridges' voice was also there, but muffled by Robert DeLute's yelling. Then the recorder went silent, and Tom heard a huff like someone had just sat in a chair. "How good of you to sit, Robert." This was Judge Bridges' voice.
"Why aren't you listening to me, Ben?" asked Robert.
Bridges snorted in contempt.
"You haven't been listening to me. I kept telling you to calm down so you could see I have already taken care of everything for you."
"Actually, I took care of most of it," said a new voice.
"Is that Craig?"
Tom yelled at the recorder, utterly flabbergasted.
"That is true," Bridges agreed. "I couldn't have done it without the detective here." "What?" yelled Tom again. "Craig did this to me?"
"Shh!" exclaimed Ross, lifting his hand up again to silence him.
"We need to talk money," said Bridges. "I need $50K more."
Robert made a mocking sound.
"Why would I give you that much?"
"Well, because it was expensive for me to convince Detective Lawson here to destroy all of the evidence he had just spent hours collecting for the Moulton boy. I need you to give me double what I paid him."
"Or else what?"
Robert fumed.
"Or else I will make sure all of the witnesses' testimonies will be just enough to convict your son."
Tom's jaw tightened as he clenched and unclenched his fists.
"You can't do that,"
Robert seethed.
"I really don't see another option for you," replied Bridges calmly.
"Fine," Robert relented hotly, and there was a loud striking sound at what must have been the table.
"This better not make it to court,"
he spit in threatening tones. Tom could hear the wicked smile in Bridges' voice.
"Sure thing."
Tom clicked off the recorder and smacked the window with his fist.
"How could he? How dare that Craig?"
He stopped short as he turned to see Detective Ross laughing wildly. Ross crowed as he slapped his thigh over and over and sometimes the steering wheel.
"Why is this funny?"
Tom said, baffled. Tom waited for him to finish laughing, but it was another minute before Ross got one word out.
"Judge Bridges is going to jail. Imagine a judge in jail. It's just too hysterical."
The detective let out another loud, obnoxious hoot. Tom felt the side of his mouth twist into a smile.
"He didn't even know he was being recorded."
Ross' laughs were now inadvertent spurts of screeching.
"It's too much," he squeaked out. "It's just too much."
Then it dawned on Tom. With this evidence, Judge Bridges would go to jail, and so would that lying, betraying Craig, and that devil David DeLute. Tom's heart soared with relief, and now he was laughing just as hard and just as ridiculously as the neurotic detective beside him. And that concludes Chapter 25. I hope you liked it. It was really fun to record that chapter. Next week will be the last and final chapter of Blemished Beauty. Can't believe it's gone by so quickly, but it's been a lot of fun, and I'm so glad that you came on this journey with me. I will take a break for a little while before Season 2, where I will record another one of my love stories and share it with you, and I will give you more details about that next time. So, I hope you have a great week. Until then, take care.